Here is lecture 2 for chapter 1, and let's talk a bit about the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. This is Econ 2, so that's macroeconomics. At Chaffey College, we have Econ 4, which is microeconomics. These are the two main branches of economics. Talk about microeconomics first. Concerned about the economy on a small scale. Its basic study is the basic study of microeconomics is markets. So the central issues are how consumers behave, how firms behave, that's the businesses, and how they interact in markets. And so in microeconomics, you would learn about supply and demand, which we're going to do in this class as well, and then you apply that throughout the rest of the semester. We will use supply and demand to some degree, but not nearly as much as it is used in microeconomics. And the main goals in microeconomics is to have markets that produce the items that people value the most, so to make sure they make the right items in the right combinations, and that's what you produce. And then produce at lowest possible cost, which is how you produce. Try to make sure they're efficient in the use of resources. And we'd like markets to do that, and if markets do that, we would say the markets are efficient. This course, macroeconomics, is concerned about the economy as a whole. We'll study a bit about markets, because we have some macro markets, such as labor markets and money markets. Macroeconomics, our central issues are nationwide indicators like unemployment, which right now is really high, inflation, and gross domestic product, or GDP. Unemployment looks at the percent of the labor force that is without work. Right now it's in the double digits, very high. This is the worst unemployment since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Inflation is not a problem right now. Inflation is still low, running about 1 to 2% a year. GDP is doing terrible right now. It just decreased 9.5% decrease in real GDP for the second quarter of this year. Second quarter would be April, May, June. We had a small rebound in economic activity at the early part of June. We went back to shutdown again in many parts of the economy, and so the number for the third quarter we're not too optimistic about. Our goals in macroeconomics are unemployment as low as possible. We're not anywhere near that. Inflation as low as possible. We have that. Steady long-term sustainable growth in GDP. We don't have that. GDP is in free fall right now. When it is growing positive, we also want it to be sustainable in the sense that we can do it year after year, decade after decade, meaning we have to have enough resources, renewable resources, and we have to be able to avoid damaging the environment too much, in which case it may not be sustainable. Now in economics, we have what's called the method of economics, and this is how we go about our job of looking at the economy. And so we have two types of these methods. One is known as positive economics. This is an approach to economics that seeks to understand behavior in the operation of systems without making judgments. So we're trying to be objective, not making judgments, not making opinions about what we should and should not do. It describes what exists and how it works. It uses the scientific method, which we'll talk about later on in this lecture, to test statements, to deal with hypotheses testing. So positive economics deals with testable statements. If you cannot test a statement, then it's not positive economics. So a statement would be that if we increase, say, unemployment benefits, or at least maintain them, that this would bring in more income to people, and therefore they could spend more, pay their rent, pay their bills. And so this would lead to increase in spending by consumers, by households. We can test that. We can collect economic data on the unemployment benefits being increased due to the impact of the pandemic. And then we can correlate that and see if spending indeed has gone up or not. So that is testable. And that would have us learn more about how the economy operates. And that is positive economics. Normative economics is an approach to economics that analyzes outcomes of economic behavior and evaluates them as good or bad and may prescribe courses of actions. And this deals with what we should and should not do. It's also known as policy economics. This becomes our policy. Our policy is how we implement economic choices. We go to positive economics first to gain information on how the economy operates, to learn what are the likely outcomes if we do this, if we do this, if we do that. And then we take that information down here, and we decide our policy. So this is when, say, Chaffey College decides to build another campus, or they decide to create a new degree. They decided to take action based on information that we develop up here based on maybe consumer demand, student demand for new programs. And then when we implement our policy, that's using normative economics. When Sacramento decides to do something, when Congress decides to do something, that's all normative economics. And that's very important. That's really beyond the scope of this course. The scope of this course is to learn how the economy operates, positive economics, keep our values out of it, but understand that the whole point of positive economics is to help people make more informed decisions using normative economics. And since positive economics is the key to this class, we'll spend just a few minutes talking about the scientific method. And again, this is using positive economics to figure out how the economy operates. And so we start with a statement or statements about relationships between one or more variables. These are our hypotheses. Next, we want to test the statement, reject or accept it. And so we can have a simple one. We can say if the price of, say, labor goes up, that's wages, that we would have maybe more people enter the labor force. So the labor force would increase. In other words, higher wages would attract more people to come in and look for work. So we would test that, collecting economic data over time. Now, when we want to do our study, oh, by the way, we can either accept or reject our hypothesis. We can never prove it correct because you'd have to prove it for every single possible case, which is not possible. And so we either accept or reject based on some kind of confidence interval. And that would be part of a statistics course, which I highly recommend every student taking. Now, control for other variables. That is a key thing for any kind of study because other variables can contaminate. For example, let's say over here at the same time price of labor goes up, and maybe this is the U.S., maybe the price of labor goes up even more in Canada. And so the people go over to Canada to get jobs, and therefore there'll be less people here looking for work. So if other variables are changing, then that can contaminate our study. Now, the problem in economics, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to control for other variables. So we rely on an assumption, and that's a key term for this class, and that's right here. It's a Latin term. It looks like it's ceteris paribus, but it's actually pronounced cateris paribus. And this means all else equal. So when this assumption holds, then that means only the variables in question are changed. And that'll be up here. Only the price of labor in the U.S. and the labor force in the U.S. would change. So again, if they hold, our studies work pretty well, and we would accept it. If it doesn't hold, if other variables are changing quite a bit that would contaminate the study, then the study is not very useful. And this also goes with our predictions. If you're going to make a prediction about something in the economy, if other variables are changing at the same time, then it makes our predictions less reliable. So economics is pretty at the mercy of this assumption here. And the bottom line is that if it holds, our studies are pretty good, our predictions are pretty good. If it doesn't hold, then we have problems. That's why it's very hard to make economic forecasting a year from now, 2 years from now, because so many things can change in the meantime. Now, when we do our studies, there are two fallacies in logical reasoning they have to be concerned about, watch out for. One is post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, which means after this, therefore because of this. sometimes just called the post hoc fallacy. And this is the common error in thinking about causation. It's really the following: if event A happens before event B or at the same time, it is not necessarily true that A caused B. So watch out for when one variable goes up and another variable goes up or down at the same time. It doesn't mean the first variable caused the second variable to change. It could be the fact that maybe B caused A to change, or maybe there's a third variable, C, that caused both to change. So don't jump to conclusions, and don't believe always that correlation proves causation. We have to be very careful about jumping to conclusions based on a few observations. The next one is fallacy of composition. This is the erroneous belief that what is true for a part is necessarily true for the whole. So if you look at a few observations on, say, some economic activity, and then you extrapolate and say that, well, that is the case for everyone out there, that is not true. And key part or key example would be paradox of thrift. It's true that if you increase your savings and spend less, that your savings would go up. But if everyone in the economy did that, everyone saved more and spend less, it doesn't mean, it's one person, this is the whole, it doesn't mean that our savings will actually go up, because this can affect everyone. If we all start to spend less and save a lot more, then that can drive the economy into a recession, cause people to lose their jobs, in which case people don't have money to save. So yeah, one person, sure, that works. Everyone may not work. And so you have to be careful about taking something may be true for one or two people and say it's correct for everyone or the entire macroeconomy.